The Hydra is a freshwater relative of the coral polyp and the jellyfish that live in the saltwater marine ocean environment. The Hydra is very, very tiny, and if you look at these pictures, there isn't really a size clue on here. Well, there's somewhat of a stick down here, but you can't really tell, except for right here, there's a thing that says 0.5 millimeters. Whoops, right here. So this bar right there is half a millimeter. Now, a millimeter is when you put your fingers like almost together, that tiny, tiny space in between. It's the smallest little mark on a metric ruler, so it's pretty tiny. It's like the head of a pin. So if you can imagine, let's see, so the head of a pin on this picture would be like this big, the size of a grape or something. So these guys are pretty tiny. And a couple things to notice here before we start drawing our own Hydra is the placement of the tentacles. The tentacles always come off the top right here. They don't come off the body. This is maybe most clear. They come off right like this. There are often 6 or 8. Sometimes you'll see 5. Sometimes maybe a tentacle is missing or grows an extra one. But something along 6, 7, 8. I'm guessing that 6 and 8 are the most common because those are very common numbers that you see in coral polyps. Most coral polyps have either 6 or 8 tentacles. So because the hydras are similar, I'm assuming that maybe that's the same. So you can either put 6 or 8. See, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, some of them are very, very long and thin. See, the longest, thinnest one is maybe right here. And that one is a very common type that you get from science catalogs. You may have seen one like that. Let's see, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think that was an 8-tentacled one. Sometimes they look a little bit shorter. I've seen ones that look like this, though. They're kind of more squat. Now, that wouldn't mean that it's a different type necessarily, because these things can stretch in and out. So it has very simple muscles that it can make itself get very short if it wants to and stretch out. When it's relaxed and feeling good, it stretches out. Now, you've probably noticed, and I haven't said anything about it yet, but you've probably noticed that some of them have, it looks like another little Hydra stuck to them. That one, and this one. And notice this is called a bud. That's very significant, that little lump there. And let's see, that one doesn't have any. That one's smooth. That one, you can see the basal disc. That one is floating. The disc, or the foot, is where it attaches right here. And this one, you can kind of see it. This one, you can see it looks like it swallowed something. You can see its food inside because they're very clear. And there's one, again, that's made itself very short. Pulled itself in. There's another one with a little extra Hydra going off here and another bud. So this is one way that the Hydra will reproduce. It starts off looking like just a little bump like this, and then it begins growing and growing, getting bigger and longer. Pretty soon it starts looking like a Hydra. Now at this point, this is all one tube. It's a hollow tube. This is hollow, and then this is hollow. This whole thing's connected. So whatever this Hydra catches and eats goes down here and gets digested. It can go right up here and it can feed the baby Hydra. Pretty soon this will just pinch off and the baby Hydra will go float away and become its own Hydra. And then it will start budding and make more Hydras. So when it reproduces like this is cloning. This Hydra is exactly the same genetically, the same DNA as this one. Now the Hydra can produce sexually with egg and sperm. Sometimes the Hydra are male or female. Sometimes they'll produce both, but a little bump will form like this, and then they'll have little egg or little sperm and a little packet on the side, and then they'll just break open, and I think the sperm gets released into the water, and then comes and finds the eggs, and they get fertilized, and then they get released into the water. So the Hydra are very, very simple animals. They don't take care of their young or anything. They don't even have a brain. They're even more rudimentary than a worm in some ways, and that they just have a nerve net. Their nervous system would just look like a fish net. There's no central ganglions anywhere. However, with nothing but a nerve net, it does pretty well. It's pretty amazing. The tentacles will catch things. And down here at the bottom of the page, it shows you some things that it likes to eat. And yes, it will stuff something that big inside of it. I've seen a video where it'll eat a couple of these all at once. Little Daphnia. Now, how in the world can it catch something like that that's so quick you think the Daphnia could just swim away? Well, of course, that's because the tentacles have stinging cells, because they're kind of like a jellyfish, and jellyfish sting. So all members of this group, Cnidaria, have stinging cells. So if you look at the words here, it'll tell you, right here, kingdom, Animalia, so it tells you it's an animal, not a plant. Phylum, Cnidaria, and it's a silent C, you don't say the C. And Cnida means nettle. And there's a plant called a stinging nettle, and it'll sting you. It's little jaggers go in, and it hurts. So that's named after the stinging nettle, the Cnidarians, because they have stingers. So the phylum Cnidaria has jellyfish, box jellyfish, Hydra, and coral polyps. Now the class is Hydrazoa, so we're narrowing it down a little bit, and then the order, Anthoathecata, and this is like it says it's a flower case. Antho is flower, and theca is like a case. And finally we get down to the family of Hydra. Hydradae, genus Hydra. And there's green Hydra and brown Hydra and common Hydra and not so common Hydra. There's some different species of Hydra. So what they all have in common is that they have stinging cells, and we'll talk more about that when we get to this right here. We'll look at the stinging cells. Alright, so the first thing you need to do is draw a Hydra. You can use those pictures. Okay, you can kind of use these as your guidelines. You can't go too far wrong because, you know, it can look blobby like this, or tall and thin, and it can kind of look just about anyway. So you really can't go wrong here. Don't worry about it. But make sure that the bottom, the basal plate, comes down here, or the basal disc. This note says the basal disc has cells that secrete a sticky substance that allows the Hydra to attach to a surface. So you might want to start by drawing a basal cell down here. Basal disc, I mean. Basal. Like that. And then go straight up. You can choose to have your Hydra with food inside of it or not. So that means you can make it pretty straight, or you can kind of give it a swollen look to it. Either one is fine. You go up like that, and then right about here, kind of make it be a little bit rounded. Now, a Hydra doesn't normally have a mouth opening. It does when it eats, but this will be smooth. If it's not eating, this is actually closed at the top. And the motion of the tentacles bringing food in will cause a hole to open up in the top. So why don't you go ahead and make some tentacles coming out the top. And yours absolutely don't have to look like mine. In fact, I probably shouldn't even draw them, because then I don't want anybody to think they have to copy mine. You can make yours curling around or whatever. You could even make a tentacle that has caught something. If you would like to put some food into the tentacle, you could maybe draw like a little Daphnia here that's caught, an ostracod, a little crustacean, a little eye spot. And you can work on this more later, so just bear that in mind. This is something you can kind of add at the end. You can add some food into its tentacles. I'm going to move on and I'll let you come back to that. Now in some Hydra also, the tentacles, they look like they kind of have little bumps sort of on them, like this. The tentacles will look, so you can do that, or if you want to, if you've been observing Hydra under the microscope in class, you can try to imitate those. You can put little lines there if you want, or you can just leave them smooth. In some of the pictures they look fairly smooth, but however you want to make your tentacles. And of course you can come back and add these details at the end. We're going to move on pretty quickly, but you can come back and add plenty of details, especially if you keep your lines very, very light when we're starting out here. Don't make everything super dark, and that way you can come back and adjust later. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put one waving out that way. And you can also put some of its prey, maybe it hasn't caught this yet, but here's maybe a little tiny worm that it's going to catch. A little lumbriculus worm or something. So you can add creatures, maybe a copepod or something. You can add some of those at the end. Okay, so we're going to move on. You can come back and finish the tentacles and add some prey at the end. Let's put a little budding Hydra coming off this. Now, all of the buds happen right in this area, right down here, above the basal disc, but kind of in the lower half of the main part of the Hydra. This is where all the budding happens. You could put one that's just sort of starting like that, and then maybe another one that's looks like it's actually starting to grow into a little Hydra here. Now, one of the reasons the Hydra is able to do this so well also is because it has a lot of stem cells. A lot of, maybe like 20% of its cells are stem cells. And a stem cell is a cell that can become anything. It can become a nerve cell, a muscle cell, a skin cell, whatever. It's kind of the ultimate regenerative cell. So we'll see in this other picture a place that has a lot of stem cells. So it helps it regenerate. If you were to cut Hydra in half, I think it would just regrow top and bottom. Although strangely enough, they're not impossible to kill, though. I mean, I've had Hydra die in the jar, I think, because they could regenerate. They had a little long time, but they're kind of tricky to keep, actually. They need a lot of oxygen and fresh water. Okay, so we have a little bud there. You point to that. There's a little paragraph right here about the buds, and that's when there's plenty to eat, conditions are good. They'll just bud and bud and bud and produce lots of little Hydra. When it senses that the conditions are not so good, like maybe winter is coming or the pond is starting to dry out, it can make, up in this region, it'll make a little bump, and usually it will make egg or sperm, indicating that these things are either male or female. Now, some species will make both, so it kind of depends, but sometimes it'll be a male or a female. So on this one we can have it do both. We can put one though, we have eggs, and maybe on this side there'll be one that has sperm. Now sometimes, I don't know if this, little tiny dots here, if this is the case with Hydra, but oftentimes the egg and the sperm on one individual, even if this Hydra would be a hermaphrodite making both, oftentimes they'll be at different days. So for a couple of days it'll make eggs, and then for a different couple of days it'll make sperm. I know this is true with some other simple invertebrates. So you really don't want to cross-fertilize. You don't want this same Hydra to have its eggs and sperm fertilize each other, because the entire point of sexual reproduction is trading DNA with another individual of your species. So you get different DNA. So this isn't going to be any different DNA. Well, it'll mix up a little bit, but you know, why not just clone, right? So, but sometimes if this happens, you know, it's no worse than having a budded clone, right? Now, the advantage to doing this, another big advantage besides treating DNA, is that an egg and a sperm, when they join to make a fertilized egg cell, right? So this is half DNA, this is other half DNA. When they get together, they make a whole individual, and that egg will then form a very tough coating around it. This will be a fertilized egg floating off, and it'll have a nice tough coating, and this fertilized egg will be able to spend the winter, survive the winter, or survive a drought, and this tough shell will help it, or a tough coating. I'm not sure what the proper term is. The fertilized egg has a nice tough coating around it that helps it survive. So the Hydra will die, not make it through the winter, but the egg will, and it'll grow into a new Hydra in the following spring. So that's how Hydra reproduce. Usually by budding, but sometimes also by sexual reproduction with egg and sperm. And the sperm just fly off into the water. They just break open, go off. Sort of like fish spawning, or like I think sponges and corals spawn like this. The sperm just will go off, and they'll hopefully float over to a different Hydra and find the eggs. Now let's work a little more on the tentacles and how it feeds. And for that, we're going to jump over to this little picture. We'll talk about the little stinger mechanisms found in the tentacles. And I don't know, there might be some actually in the body too. Not sure. This cross section basically would be like a little piece of a Hydra like this. If you want to do this, make a little box like that, showing this box is this box, and sometimes they draw lines like this to show it going out, so that you're zooming in on this little tiny box. So I'm going to just zoom in. And this is where we'll use a little bit of color. You see, obviously, we've got these little boxes here for color. And you can choose whatever color you want to use. You don't have to use what I'm going to use, but I'm going to choose pink for my first section. The mesoglia. Meso means middle, and glia means glue or jelly-like stuff. And that would be the central stripe down here. The mesoglia is the jelly of which jellyfish are made. So jellyfish have a lot of mesoglia. The Hydra has just a tiny bit. And it's the middle layer that separates the inside from the outside. And a Hydra only has two sides. It's very, very simple. It has an outer layer and an inner layer. Just two layers of cells. That's how tiny, how small and delicate this thing is. Only two layers of cells. And of course the cells are microscopic, so it's kind of amazing we can even see the Hydra when you think it's made of only two layers of cells. So then, see, the next thing we'll put in is, let's just go straight down here, nerve cells. I'm going to make mine kind of a purplish. And that would be these things right here. So these are neurons, very much like you have. In fact, so similar that you can do experiments sometimes on creatures like this and see how their neurons work. And you can actually learn a little bit about how mammals' neurons work. You can do simple memory testing on worms and things because their neurons function in much the same way. Now, that's about it for the nervous system. There's no ganglion, like worms and planaria have a ganglion, kind of a centralized area, a little blob. Can't really call it a brain, but they have a ganglion. These guys don't even have ganglions. They just have what's called a nerve net. And it's just, you imagine, you know, like those bags that maybe onions or mandarin oranges or something like that comes in. You know, it's just kind of a crisscross mesh net bag. Just imagine that. It's just got this little like fish net all over its body with no ganglions. But it's amazing, even though it just has a nerve net, it can really function very well. It can feed itself and move around and do very, very simple behaviors. Okay, so that's the nervous system. Now the epidermis and the gastrodermis are its two layers, and I'm going to pick a nice light set of colors, maybe some orange and yellow. I'm going to make my epidermis yellow, I think, and my gastrodermis orange. I don't know why, but orange just seems like a gastrodermis kind of color. But before we color them all in, let's add a couple things inside the cells. Let's start with the gastrodermis. We'll save these epidermis and all the little stinging cells for last. This is the inside layer. And let me zoom in a little bit more. And so it's called the gastrodermis because the inner layer is also the stomach layer. Like, it only has two layers, so this layer is the inside of this cavity here, which is basically like the stomach. So gastro means stomach or digestion. So these are all the cells. So let's put a nucleus. Put a nucleus in each cell. This teardrop shaped thing is also a cell, but make the nucleus pretty tiny because we're going to put something else in there. I just like to make a few little squiggles to represent DNA, because as you know, the nucleus is where the DNA is. And the nucleus might be in different places. It doesn't always exist in the end there like that. It might be in the middle, but I like to keep it kind of neat and tidy out of the way here on this side. Okay, so we got all the nuclei in. And then in these cells, these teardrop-shaped cells, we're going to add some circles. And these are going to be vesicles that are filled with digestive enzymes. So because you have vesicles and enzymes, you know there's other cell machinery in here. There's going to be endoplasmic reticulum, there's going to be Golgi bodies, there's going to be all the normal cell parts of a eukaryotic cell. And those parts have manufactured the enzymes and put them into these little vesicle bags, and now the vesicles are sitting there waiting, ready to be released. They'll just merge with the cell wall and release the enzymes into the digestive cavity. And that's how the Hydra will digest its food. These enzymes will just go right out and start digesting. So let's see, you also have to put something on the cells that don't have those little circles, the regular cells here. We're going to put a little hair coming off, a cilia. And the cilia can move, they can beat together up or down. Imagine this is a very long rowing vessel, a ship where you have all those people with the oars. and all these oars are going in the same direction. They can all go push, push, push. They all beat together like this. It's going to move the water around inside that cavity. If they go like this, it'll move the water the other direction. And so the Hydra can control how much water goes in and out, and help push things out, bring things in, or flush things out. And of course the nerve net would control these, forcing them all to do the same motion and in rhythm. So we can actually, over here where you see the numbers, number 1 is cilia. You could even go ahead and label this. Number 1, those are the cilia. And number 2, this is the nucleus. You want to put a little 2 right there. That's the nucleus of the cell. And number 3, I'm just going to put a little arrow. That's the gland cell. The whole thing is the gland cell. And then down here, so you have 2 of them. 1 gland cell, 2. Number 4, the vesicles that contain that. Actually, let's see. Maybe you can label that down here, or maybe I want to make my arrow go in tight and point to that. Number 4, those vesicles. So number 3 is the cell, and number 4 is the actual little circles in there. Now you don't have to label it down here also. You can just label one of them. Alright, so we have the gastrodermal cells that have the cilia, and we have special gland cells that contain the digestive enzymes. Now I think that's what we need on this side, and you can just lightly color the cells. If you want to add more little cell parts, you can. Oops, I just figured out something else too. I just remembered. We are going to add, when we get done with this, we'll add one more thing. One more important thing. You notice how many of the Hydra are green. Not all, but many of them are green. Well, the Hydra itself isn't green, it's clear. What's green is the little algae cells. And so down here, the last one down here, I'm going to use green. This is algae cells. And so we need to add algae cells living inside the gastrodermal cells. Now coral does this too. In fact, a big crisis right now with coral reefs is that the algae cells don't like the oceans being tiny bit on the warm side. We're talking 1 degree, but algae are picky. And the algae are leaving the corals, deciding to go elsewhere, and then the corals are dying. And it's called bleaching. It's very sad. Now, what do the algae cells do? Well, an algae cell is like a very simple plant. It's not actually in the plant kingdom, that's more in the protist kingdom, but it's green because it contains chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is the molecule that can take the sunlight and capture the energy from the sun and allow the cell to turn that into sugar and oxygen. So the algae cell is doing exactly what the plant cell does, and using the process of photosynthesis. So here are those little algae cells getting the sunlight and cranking out little sugars, glucose, and oxygen. Now, the Hydra is an animal. It's not a plant, it's an animal, and it can't do photosynthesis, and it needs oxygen, and it needs sugar for energy, just like your body does. So the Hydra is very happy to have these living inside of it because the cells are being provided with sugar and oxygen. Now the algae is happy about this because, look at this, is like a little neighborhood. All these little houses lined up. It's a safe little neighborhood, and the algae has a safe place to live. It's not getting eaten by copepods and Daphnia and other things that would eat it. So it has a nice safe place to live. So this is a very good arrangement. And then when the Hydra buds and the new Hydra forms, it's of course going to take some of these algae cells with it, and then the algae will multiply. They'll divide in half and they'll just multiply to fill the new Hydra. And they think that even some of them might go along in the egg cells. They think it's possible that even some of the egg cells might take along a couple algae to get the new population started. But the algae can also come in. They can just come in here. They can just come in the outside like this. I know this happens with coral. They can just come in and just go into the cell. They can just whoosh, go right into the cell. Okay, I think that's everything now for that side. Let's go ahead and do this last one right here where it says muscle. Now, we almost can put the word muscle in quotes because it's not quite like your muscles, but it acts like a muscle. These are little tissues that can contract, and they're right in between the mesoglea and the nerve right here. And there's 2 layers, one on either side of the mesoglea. And if you want to be really detailed about this, the inside one, this is the circular muscle. It goes in rings around the Hydra like little belts. And if you were to cut it like this, what you would see is it would look stripy like this, because you'd be seeing these individual pieces that are going this way. The muscles are going back and forth like this. This one on this side, you would not see that. You would just see these continuous thing. These are all the same fiber going up and down. So that's how you would tell the difference. These are the, if you want to label it, you can. Circular. And these are, I think they call them longitudinal because they go long, up and down. So the circular ones are the ones that when the Hydra squeezes, it gets very tall and thin. And the longitudinal ones, when it contracts these, it gets very, very short. So that's its option. It can contract the circular muscle, or it can contract the longitudinal, or a combination. So that's how it can move. But it doesn't move, of course, in the same way that a worm does. It just kind of, anyway, but it can do what they call somersaulting. It can very slowly, it can pick up its foot. It can loosen that base. It can decide to let go. And it kind of flips over like a handstand and over like a somersault in the water. It goes over its tentacles and then stands up again and re-glues itself. So it can do some kind of tricky maneuvers like that. Now for the outer layer, the epidermis, and our skin is also called the epidermis. Epi means outside and dermis means skin. Let's see, let's start once again by putting in the nuclei, the cells. Again, they can be anywhere. I just like kind of keeping them back to the side, to the back end there, to kind of keep them consolidated. And then you'll see that, wait a second, let's mark this first. Do you see how this purple one kind of comes out, sticks out like that? That's number 5, the sensory neuron. So this is a little nerve cell that sticks out, and as you might guess, if something brushes against it, the neuron's going to go, ooh, I felt that. So this is what gives it its sense of touch. If you touch it, it'll have that reflex. It'll move away, and that's thanks to these sensory neurons. Okay, you'll see now though that there's 2 cells that have this U-shaped thing here. This one, and down here this one. These are going to be the cnidocytes. Number 6. These are going to be the cnidocytes. Now you're going to need to draw kind of a squiggly back and forth thing right in this pocket here. I'm just going to go squiggle, 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 squiggle. This is going to represent the harpoon all wound up in there, ready to come out. then you're going to need to draw a little hair thingy sticking up at the side. This is the trigger. And same thing on the bottom one, just make a little loopy thing. And then a trigger. So the trigger would be number 7. The cell is number 6. So nido is stinging and site is cell. So nidosite just means the stinging cell. Now I think you can color that now. There's no cilia on this side. I mean, this. Why would you need cilia? Because this is the great outdoors on this side. If you can be beating your cilia all you want, and the ocean waves are just, or the, not the ocean, the pond current is just gonna be a lot stronger than any little cilia wave. So let's color code these. And you know, interesting thought, you could actually color code your drawing if you wanted to. One idea would be you could make, like, say this is yellow for my epidermis, the whole, one yellow line going all the way around, right? Yellow, 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 yellow. And even here, yellow, it would be the outside line everywhere. Yellow, yellow, yellow. And then inside of that, mine would be orange. Inside that, right, I'll just make one little bit, that yellow and orange like that. Your two colors. And so that would be, right, the whole thing. That's it, just one layer, like that. But you don't have to do that. It's up to you. If you want to make it, more realistic, if you want to kind of color it green and make it more realistic type Hydra, you can do that. I'll let that be your artwork. And then right here, the last thing, number 8, is the stem cells. See this little pocket right here? It looks like little eggs or something. Those are actually the stem cells. Number 8. I'll point to them. It's a little bit hard. Maybe use this. Use my pen to get a little more accurate there. Remember, the stem cells are the cells that can grow into anything. One of those stem cells could become epidermis, gastrodermis, nerve cell, muscle cell, whatever it needs. It can become anything. And you hear a lot about stem cells and cloning with mammals and things too. Planaria have a lot of stem cells. That's why they can regenerate so quickly. So that's the anatomy of a Hydra. And it would be the same basically all over, except you would have more of these nidosite stinging cells along here. Obviously, this would be very rich in stinging cells. So what happens is the trigger gets, something comes along, hits that trigger, and that little harpoon thing comes out very quickly. And it also has some poison. And the poison is in the form of a neurotoxin that will paralyze the muscles. It just instantly prevents muscles from working. Even very simple muscles like copepods have very simple nervous systems. And so that the amount of poison it makes is just enough to knock out a copepod. If you touch it, nothing's going to happen. The Hydra is very, very tiny. So if you get stung with that, in fact, it probably couldn't. It's probably too soft. It probably wouldn't even penetrate your skin. But the neurotoxin will go in to the little worm or the little Daphnia and paralyze it. And then the tentacles will sense that something's been caught, and it'll start bringing this in. And actually, the little critter's body will start releasing a certain chemical, and the Hydra will sense that, and it'll stimulate its feeding instinct, and it'll pull it all down to here. All the tentacles will pull in, a hole will open up, and the tentacles will just pull that thing and stuff it down in here, and then you'll see, see its food down in here, so you'll be able to see what it had for dinner. There'll be food down in here. And then it's only got one opening. When it's done digesting, if they can't digest the hard shell or little parts that it couldn't digest, the feet or whatever, then the hole opens up again and the cilia flushes it out, and it just flushes out the waste out the top. So it just has one opening at the top. Things go in, things come out. And also down here you would have, now one difference here in this basal cell, you'd have some specialized cells down here in the foot that would be making a sticky mucus. Instead of digestive enzymes, they'd be making a sticky mucus to help it stick to something. So you can make your Hydra stick to something if you want, or it can be floating around. They also like to hang upside down. They like to stick to the underside of leaves sometimes and hang upside down. They don't care about gravity. So then you can take all the time you want to finish up your drawing, make it as artistic as you would like to. There you go.